once again, we'd like to turn to John chapter 4. This is where we were last week. This is a very eventful chapter. We see Jesus is on the move, making life-transforming impact upon the lives of people. In verse 3, he's seen leaving Judea, and he heads to Galilee. On his way to Galilee, he will go through Samaria. He'll arrive at a city of Samaria called Sychar, and would be there that he would save a certain woman of Samaria. It was also there that he would instruct the apostles, and many Samaritans would come to believe in him. After 2 days, in verse 43, he departs, continues unto Galilee, eventually arriving in Cana. There he is met by a certain nobleman who had obviously heard that Jesus was coming. And this nobleman pleads with Christ on the behalf of his dying son, who happened to be 18 to 20 miles away in Capernaum. And Jesus displays his healing power in healing his son without even going to Capernaum. So the chapter really is a revelation and an illustration of the transforming power of Christ. The bulk of the chapter, through verse 42, is what takes place in Samaria. And the bulk of that is the conversation that Christ had with this Samaritan woman at the well of Jacob, which resulted in her salvation. In the chapter, in the account of Samaria, again, there are many things. We see the condition, we see the urgent need of the sinner. We see how Christ deals with sinners and the saving of their souls. We see his willingness to go to sinners. We see his willingness to receive this sinner. And it's just basically a display of his love, his mercy, and his grace. Also in the account, we see the change that salvation brings to the sinner's life. It serves as a picture of our own salvation experience. But in this conversation that Christ had with this woman of Samaria, there's many lessons. We can learn a lot about personal evangelism. We see the priceless excellence of Christ's gifts in comparison to the temporal. And following this Samaritan woman's experience at the well, she would go into the city and testify what she had experienced at that well. And in her, we see a passionate life for Christ. Also, after the woman had gone into the city, the apostles returned. And they returned to where Christ was, and there was a conversation between him and them. We see that in verses 31 through 38. And the conversation basically is about how the spiritual is to have precedence over the temporal. So from all this, we see that in this account of Jesus and the Samaritan woman, it's very instructive. There are a variety of applications that can be made, a variety of ways to approach the account. Today we want to read verse 7 and then verses 25 through 29. Verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. Verse 25 through 29. The woman said unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. Jesus saith unto her, I that speak unto thee am. I'm he. And upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he talked with the woman. Yet no man said, what seekest thou? Or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot, and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, come see a man, which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Again, the bulk of the chapter speaks of the salvation of this Samaritan woman, and what we just read is a part of that account. Last week we viewed it from a salvation aspect. That's not our intent in this message, to view it with regards to our salvation experience, but we want to speak to the saved, and with the emphasis being the importance of you and I meeting with Jesus Christ every day, so that we do not get bogged down, so that the temporal does not overtake our lives. In our text verses, there are three statements that we want to call your attention to. First of all, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Secondly, the woman left her water pot. Thirdly, come see a man. And our subject is water pots and Christ. We all have water pots. We have to put the water pots and we have to put Christ somewhere. Water pots and Christ. So let's consider, first of all, these three statements. It is stated in verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. She's a desperately needy soul. She doesn't know it. She's needy of the life. She's needy of the pardon, the justification, the cleansing, the reconciliation, the acceptance that the one who is sitting upon that well can give her. But that's not the reason that she's coming to that well. Her reason for coming is clearly stated: to draw water. Now, I don't take that as a statement of condemnation upon her. She came to draw water. It's just simply a statement of fact. She is coming to draw water. Nothing wrong with that. It was something that must be done. Her intent of going to the well that day was to draw water. Her focus is to draw water. Her state of mind is to draw water. This is her objective. I'm going to go to the well. I'm going to fill my water pot with water. This was her desire. This was the priority at that time. So there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Here she comes. It's obvious that she's carrying a water pot to Jacob's well to draw water. This was her routine, I am sure. It was her regiment. It was her habit. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. This was a part of her life. More than likely, a part of her everyday life. Nothing wrong with what she is doing. But in the context, it does paint a picture. She comes to draw water. Very mundane, very ordinary. And it appears that she's stuck in the mundane and the ordinary. And sadly, it's a picture of many of God's people. She cometh to draw water. It's very easy for our lives to become mundane. It's very easy for our lives to become very ordinary. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. What she is doing is essential to daily life. Again, we're not condemning her for going to the well to draw water. What she was doing is essential to daily life. But it is also a picture of the temporal. It is a picture of the duties and the responsibilities and the tasks of everyday life. We all have them. We all are responsible for duties every day and tasks. Nothing wrong with that. It's a fact of life. Now, stated in verse 28, the second statement, the woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city. Again, it's very clearly stated that she came to draw water. And the fact that she came to draw water makes this statement, the woman left her water pot, very curious statement. A statement out of the ordinary. It is a statement that gives rise to many questions. There cometh a woman to draw water. The woman left her water pot and went her way into the city. Those two statements do not equate without some sort of explanation. Something had to happen. She came with her water pot, the purpose of drawing water and bringing it back home. But she came with her water pot to draw water, and then she left. Someone will say, well, she just forgot. Really? I don't think so. Something out of the ordinary. Something out of the usual had to happen between these two statements. She cometh to draw water. She left her water pot. She came with her water pot to draw water. And the fact that she left her water pot and returned to the city, I believe it's a very significant statement in the account. It's a very noteworthy feature of what transpired that day at the well. The fact that she came to draw water, the fact that she left her water pot at the well indicates again that something has happened. There has been an interruption. An interruption has occurred and a change has taken place. It was her routine to carry her water pot to the well and draw water, and then to take it back home. So the fact that she left her water pot at the well and returned home without water in her water pot reveals that her ordinary routine has been interrupted. Something has happened. So this is not she left her water pot. is not a statement that you can just pass over in this account, because, again, it gives rise to a lot of questions. So we can't just pass over this statement as trivial, without any thought, without any consideration. She left her water pot really is a remarkable statement. Water, of course, was an extremely valuable commodity. The very fabric of life, you had to have water. Just like today, you have to have it. But in those days, somebody had to go get it and carry it back to the house. And the water pot was the means of doing so. And therefore, the water pot was an absolute essential for everyday life. You had to have a water pot. You have to have water. And the water pot is the means of getting the water to the house. So the water pot is absolutely essential to daily life. It serves as a picture of the essential temporal things of life. Again, the duties, the responsibilities, the tasks of everyday life. The woman then left her water pot. This is indicative of the fact that there has been a change in her perspective. The woman, that's the very woman that carried the water pot to the well to draw water. That very woman left her water pot at the well. Her intention has changed. Her routine has been, again, interrupted. The woman then left her water pot. Does that not reveal that the water in Jacob's well was no longer her first interest? She wouldn't have left it. It was no longer her main concern. So there's been a change in what really matters in her life. Again, we see her, she's carrying her water pot to the well. You don't do that by accident. She purposely picked up the water pot that afternoon. She purposely carried it to the well. And she had a purpose for doing so, to draw water. And yet, she left her water pot at the well. And I don't believe that was an accident either. I believe she left it there on purpose. And she left it there with a purpose. So there's been a change in the relative position of the water pot. We come to the third statement. Not only did she leave her water pot, but she's living a different life. We read, she left her water pot, went her way into the city, and saith to the men, come see a man. You can only imagine the animation upon her face. Quite different, I'm sure, from her facial expressions when she was walking to Jacob's well with a water pot. We hear her. There's excitement in her voice as she says, "Come see a man." And as you listen to her, her mind is no longer on the temporal things of life. Her mind is upon Christ. Come see a man. Is not this the Christ? Christ has captivated her heart and her mind. She had come with her water pot to draw water, but she left her water pot and went her way into the city. A radical change has taken place in her life. Has there not been a change in her plans? Most certainly. Her plans have changed. I want to say her values have changed. Where she placed the water pot in her life has changed. Her outlook upon water pots has changed. She came to draw water, but she left her water pot and went her way into the city. There's been a change, a relative change in her interest in what matters the most. There's been a change in her priorities. Drawing water and the water pot is no longer her number one priority. She left her water pot. Now, she didn't leave it there permanently. Somewhere along the line, she went back and got that water pot. Why? Because life must go on. She needs that water pot. There are earthly duties. But my point is, the relative position and importance of the water pot has changed. Still needs the water pot to live everyday life, but the relative position, relative to Christ, that has changed. She left her water pot. Her life is no longer dominated by the temporal affairs of life. And I believe it was at this point, it was this very point that Jesus made to the apostles in verse 31. Well, let's read that. Verse 31, verse 32. In the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. That's temporal. And you got to eat. But he said unto them, I have meat to eat that you know not of. And then in verse 34, Jesus said unto them, My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. Jesus is not condemning eating. You have to eat. But he's talking about relative here. He's saying there's something more important than eating physical meat. This is what that woman came to realize. There's something, yes, the water pot is absolutely necessary, but there's something more important. Come see a man. Is not this the Christ? You see, we have this destructive and enslaving tendency to get bogged down, to get mired, to get stuck, to get entangled and overwhelmed in the necessities of life. And we allow water pots, the necessities, to dominate and control our life. Nothing wrong with the water pot. You need the water pot. You need the water pot to live. But it's not to control. It's not to dominate our lives. And there are some principles laid down in what transpired between this Samaritan woman and Christ that will keep us from getting entangled in the necessities of life. Life can get in the way of Christ. And when it does, we've done something wrong. When we allow life to get in the way, we failed. Well, I have to. Yes, there's things we have to do. But they don't have to get in the way. Nor should they. So let's look at some daily essentials that will keep us from being bogged down with water pots. Again in verse 7, there's a statement. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that activity. Verse 28, the woman then left her water pot. And in verse 28 and 29, with that water pot left at the well, she went her way into the city and said to the men, "Come see a man. Is not this the Christ?" It is what happened between verse 7 and verses 28 and 29 that explains verses 28 and 29. That explains why she left her water pot. If you were to come to a well in those days and see a water pot sitting there, you would immediately start to look around. There's got to be someone around. But as you looked around and realized there's nobody around, I'm the only one here, you would assume, more than likely, there must be something wrong with that water pot. It must be cracked. It must have a hole in it. No one leaves a perfectly good water pot. It's essential for life. But you pick up that water pot and you begin to examine it, and there are no cracks. There are no leaks. It's a perfectly good water pot. And someone has left it at the well. Well, you immediately begin to ask, why? Why would someone leave a perfectly good water pot at the well? Why would they do that? It's just like if you walked out, you came out of a grocery store. You happen to be the only one in the grocery store that night, and you come out and there's a grocery cart full of food. You're going to ask, what in the world? Why would somebody leave? They went to the grocery store to get food. They put it in the cart. Why would they leave? You would immediately assume something's happened. That's what you would assume if you came to this well on that day. You just do not leave a usable water pot at the well. Something out of the ordinary has happened. And again, what happened at the well that day caused this woman to leave her water pot. It is a vivid picture of what happened to you and I when the Lord saved us. It is also a picture of what needs to happen on a daily basis so that we will have a right correlation between water pots and Christ. so that we have a right correlation between the temporal and the spiritual. So notice what took place. And this needs to take place every day. There was a personal meeting with Christ. What brought about this change of purpose and this change of this woman's plans and her focus and her state of mind, her perspective, was she had a personal meeting with Jesus Christ, in which she came under the transforming power of Christ. We need to have every day not just a personal meeting with Christ, but a personal meeting that brings us under the transforming power of Christ. And such a meeting will keep the water pots of everyday life in their proper place. Yes, I realize water pots are necessary. There are necessary responsibilities in life. We realize that. But these things must be kept in their proper place. And a personal, transforming meeting with Christ will do that. Secondly, she personally heard his voice. In verse 7, Jesus saith unto her. He spoke directly to her. And here's what he said. Give me. Give me. We need to hear him personally. Every day. And every day we need to hear him personally say, give me. Give me. Yes, I know you have other things to do, but give me. Give me. She did not have to wonder if he was talking to her, because it was just the two of them there. That's why we need this personal, one-on-one meeting with Christ. We need to hear what he has to say. We need to hear him say to us individually, give me. Give me. And without any doubt in our mind that he is speaking directly to us. We need to hear him. And that helps us to keep the water pots in their proper relative position. Thirdly, her attention was directed toward Christ. Jesus said unto her, give me to drink. She had come to draw water. That was her state of mind. She probably did it like a robot. She's done it so many times. But had her attention not been diverted, she would have drawn the water like she did every day and been on her way. Life would have just been mundane, ordinary. But as a reminder of the place of things in our life, we need every day to have our attention directed toward Christ. Just so we're reminded, because otherwise we will forget. We will get so caught up in the temporal and the everyday necessities and life itself that we will leave Christ out. So our attention needs to be directed toward Christ every day. He revealed unto her that she was a needy soul, and that he had what she needed. We see that in verse 10, verse 13, and verse 14. Lest we go mindlessly through the day, attending to the temporal things of life, every single day we need to be reminded we're a needy people, and He has what I need. He has what I need. Fifthly, also in verse 10, 13, and 14, Christ spoke of eternal blessings. He reminded her of the unsatisfying nature of earthly things in verse 13. Yes, they're necessary. It's necessary that I draw water out of Jacob's well. I have to do that. But realize I'll have to do it again tomorrow too. Why? Because it's not lasting. It's not lasting. So he's reminding her of the unsatisfying nature of the temporal. Unless we get things in the wrong order. Oh, and we're good at it. Well, you realize I have to go to work. I have to do this. I have to do that. We realize that. No one's arguing that. But don't you see, each has to have its proper place. That's the issue. Unless we get things in the wrong order, we need to be reminded every day of the unsatisfying nature of the temporal. That's why you got to keep doing it over and over. In verse 14, Jesus declared where real satisfaction of soul could be found. And it was in Him. So lest we pursue the wrong things, we need to be reminded of the eternal. Sixthly, and most importantly, Christ revealed Himself to her. Jesus saith unto her, she had said, we know the Messiah cometh, which is Christ. Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am. And when He did that, He stood revealed to her. Jesus said unto her, it was personal. Had to be. She's the only one there. I am. And I believe at this moment, she had a clear perception. Up until then, it was, he's a Jew. But she now has a clear perception of His person. She sees His magnificence. She sees His splendor. She sees His glory. We need this every day. Why do I need it every day? Because you'll forget if you don't have it every day. Jesus saith unto her, I am. He was revealed. He was made known to her. She is personally met. She has personally experienced Jesus Christ. That needs to happen every day. Every day. Notice what it says here in verse 26. Or it's then, the woman then, after Christ revealed Himself to her. That's a very important word. It's not just the woman left her water pot. It's the woman then left her water pot, verse 28. Then. When? After Christ said, I am. That's what caused her to leave her water pot. Then. There's an order here. Anytime you see the word then, there's order. Something has gone on before. Then left her water pot. And now uppermost in her mind is not the water pot. Uppermost in her mind is Christ. That must always be the case. Yes, we have our daily water pot. But that is never to be uppermost in our mind. Then, the relative position of the water pot has changed. And she goes into the city shouting, "Come see a man." Due to what happened that day at the well, her perception of Christ has changed. "I that speak unto thee am." The woman then left her water pot. It is our perception of Christ that determines our perception of the everyday things of life. There are the everyday things of life, things you and I have to do. We would be irresponsible if we did not do them. But what is our perception of those things? That's the issue. Where do we place these things? So she goes from verse 9, "Thou being a Jew," to "Come see a man." Is not this the Christ? What has happened? Her life is no longer lived in relation to that water pot. Yes, the water pot is essential, an absolute necessity. But she's no longer living in relation to the water pot. She's living in relation to Christ. And that's a world of difference. There's a world of difference. So her life is now not being lived in relation to water pots, but Christ. And she has a passion, she has a resolve for Christ. Why is it that most, and I mean most by a long ways, I mean it's not 51-49% here, we're talking 99.99%. Why is it that most who profess to be saved have more passion and resolve for the everyday things of life, the necessities of life, than they do Christ? Well, it's explained right here. It really is. These things aren't happening. Because if they were, there'd be a change in the way in what we live our life in relation to. Every single day we need to meet with this one who saved our soul. We need to see him revealed to us. And when we do, we'll live our lives in relation to Christ and not in relation to water pots. I'm not saying we neglect the water pot. It's not what I'm saying. It's what do you live your life in relation to. The water pots are necessary. But we're not to live life in relation to them. We live our lives in relation to Christ. As children of God, I believe we can live above being controlled and weighted down by the water pots of life. I believe we can. But I believe what we read in our text has to take place on a daily basis. And I believe it depends upon our perception of Christ. It's not so much dependent upon our perception of the temporal, it's our perception of Christ, because our perception of Christ determines our perception of the temporal. So it's not so much that a person has too much of a perception of temporal things, it's they have a wrong perception of Christ. That's the problem. The world has a powerful draining effect. That's not a newsflash. We all realize that. The world has a powerful draining effect upon spirituality. But I don't believe we have to fall prey to such. And I'll tell you why. Because just as there was one at the well for the Samaritan woman, he's there for us too. And if we just meet with him every day and experience what she experienced, we might leave our water pot too. He's the life, he's the light, he's the strength, he's everything we need. And every day we need to meet him. We need to hear him. We need to see him. We need to know him. We need to receive him. And that'll keep us from having wrong values and wrong loyalties and wrong concerns and wrong pursuits. If we have wrong values and loyalties and concerns and pursuits, may not want to hear it, but the reason for that is because Christ has been replaced. Christ is not where he should be in your life. It's that simple. Such will cause, if we meet him every day, that will cause us to live life in relation to Christ and not water pots. It'll make a positive difference in our lives. This woman left her water pot at the well, went back to the city testifying of what she experienced. And notice verse 39, and many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman which testified. He told me all that I ever did. Her life made a positive difference. We get too caught up in the temporal, in the everyday necessities of life. Your life won't make a whole lot of difference. If we want our life to make a difference, we have to live in relation to Christ. And I'm sure that that woman went back, got her water pot, and I'm sure she carried that water pot to Jacob's well many, many, many times. But she did so with a song in her heart. It was different now. In our relationship to Christ, yes, temporal life must go on. The essential things of life must go on. But we do it with a different heart when Christ is where he belongs. So we need to ask ourselves, what is our identity in life? Christ or water pots? You read obituaries, or I read obituaries all the time. I find them very interesting. You can learn a lot by just reading a simple obituary. Most of them, he, she was a printer or a seamstress or whatever. And they emphasize those things. Why? Because that was their life. That's what identified them. That's sad for a child of God. That's sad for a child of God. What is a more accurate picture of our lives? Verse 7, she cometh to draw water. Or verse 28 and 29, come see a man, is not this the Christ? Again, we have to draw water. But what identifies our life? The temporal or the spiritual? And again, this isn't something that you can just say, well, starting today, I'm going to live my life in relation to Christ. And, simple as that. Go on and it happens. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to meet with him every day. Because if we don't, I guarantee you, the temporal will take over. It will take over your life. And you will use it as an excuse for your lack of spirituality. Well, if I didn't have to, whatever, then I would be able to. No, that's not the reason. I know by convincing yourself that's the reason, makes you feel better, makes people feel better, but that's not the reason. That's a lie. The reason is they don't put enough emphasis upon Christ. And that's why people's lives don't improve, is because they do not address the root issues. They address symptoms, but they do not get to the root issues. Why? Because that requires honesty. That requires honesty. And most people, they don't want to go there. So God help us to live our lives in relation to Christ, not in relation to water pots. Brother Ben, you come and lead us in a verse of song.